There are times when you deserve more than a coffee break, so make a cup of Mellow Birds. You'll find its smooth, mellow flavor turns an ordinary coffee break into a mellow moment. Mellow Birds for mellow moments.
Every day should have some.
Welcome to another Mellow Moments, friends. Mellow Birds at the ready. The hug in a mug. Let's see what's on the box today.
Rainbows climb, clouds drift by, brollies fly through a magic sky. Is it real? Are they dreams? Nothing appears to be what it seems. Then far away I can hear a voice in the weather house call out a name. Mr. Brolly, it's time for the rain.
It came, pouring from the sky, until the earth was fresh again. Then the sun, the magic in the air, the volleys make the weather for you and me.
Harry was trying to go to sleep, but no sooner had he closed his eyes than he opened them again. Tucked up beside Harry in bed were his toys, Elephant and Hippo. Snake, as always, lay on the rug by the door, and Bird was perched on the chest of drawers. Harry stared down at his patchwork quilt. It was different from other quilts. Instead of flowery scraps of material, it was made of little embroidered pictures of rainbows, stars and planets, clouds, and great flashes of lightning in a dark and stormy sky. It had been made a long, long time ago. On the wall hung Harry's weather house. If the day was going to be fine and sunny, Mrs. Brolly came to her door. If the day was going to be wet and cloudy, Mr. Brolly came out. But of course, they never came out together, for it is impossible for a day to be both wet and dry at the same time.
It's good logic, friends. Foundations of logic still available.
But what would happen if they both came out together? Wondered Harry, and he sat up and stared at the weather house. As he stared, the doors seemed to grow larger. His bed grew smaller, and he found himself at the entrance of the weather house. A light was shining from the door, through which Harry could see Mr. Brolly no longer fixed to his wooden stand, but moving freely about the room. For days and days, the sky had been grey. Even in the weather house, it was just the same. Mrs. Brolly was nowhere to be seen, and Mr. Brolly dozed in his chair. Even Wilkins seemed drowsy. And as for Little Cloud, he just handed
I love the idea that the sunflower is called Wilkins.
Harry an unlit thunderbolt. At that moment, Mrs. Brolly appeared. "I'm tired of all this greyness," she said, "and Brolly won't do anything about it. He just sits there, snoring. What I want," she went on, pressing a button on the computer, "is colour, music, and warmth. I want to go on holiday." "I know just the place," said the computer, and it put up on its screen a picture of a Mexican village. The village stood beside a beautiful lake, on which there was an island with a ruined fort. "We shall go at once," said Mrs. Brolly, and immediately her trunk appeared. Outside in the garden, Harry and Mrs. Brolly opened their umbrellas and drifted up. The trunk floated behind them. The sky had brightened, and they had reached the edge of the land. Over the shining sea they went. In the control room, the little cloud said, "Pip." The smiling face of the computer appeared.
It's kind of surreal, isn't it? I'm watching it almost in a trance here.
"Oh, it's you," it said. "What do you want?" "Please, sir," said Wilkins, "we want to go on holiday too." "And why not?" said the computer. "Off you go." Wilkins rose into the air at once, but the little cloud stayed where he was. Plop! "Please, sir," said Wilkins, "he wants a trunk, like Harry and Mrs. Brolly." "And what would a small cloud have to pack in a trunk?" asked the computer. "Bumpers," said the little cloud angrily. He means thunderbolts," said Wilkins. "He calls them thunders, only it comes out bumpers." "I see," said the computer, and at once a small trunk appeared. It was a nice little trunk, but it jiggled about a lot, being full, as it was, of bumpers. Wilkins and the little cloud set off happily for Mexico, followed by their trunk. "Adios," said the computer as they went. Then it sang loudly, "You too can go to Mexico, land of sunshine and song." What?" said Mr. Brolly. "Who's gone to Mexico? What?" Harry and Mrs. Brolly were floating over the ocean. Behind them came the trunk, humming a song and playing a little Mexican air. "Mrs. Brolly," said Harry. There was Wilkins and the little cloud following as fast as they could, both sitting on the trunk to keep the lid on the lively bumpers.
This is so bizarre.
In the bathroom, Mr. Brolly was standing before the mirror, trying on a wonderful sombrero. He tried it tilted to the left.
Mr. Brolly looks like that actor Patrick McGee, who's in Clockwork Orange. You know, the guy who lives in Home. He's also in the movie version of The Birthday Party by Harold Pinter. You know, the William Friedkin version. That actor, Patrick McGee.
And then to the right. And then he set it quite straight on his head and grew himself a long black moustache. "Oh, good heavens," he said, astounded by his appearance, which was, to say the least, striking. Harry, Mrs. Brolly, the little cloud, and Wilkins came down by the side of the beautiful lake.
If you don't know the actor I'm talking about, by the way, I mean this dude, Patrick McGee. Patrick McGee. See if I've got any other pictures of him. Here's another picture of him. Patrick McGee. So there we go. Let's carry on.
"Have our photograph taken," said Mrs. Brolly. "All travellers have their photographs taken." The lid of the trunk opened, and out stepped a long-legged camera. The travellers stood in a group and smiled. Then they all moved a little to the right, and then they moved a little to the left, and then the photograph was taken, and the party set off, with the trunks bobbing behind. But they forgot their umbrellas and left them hanging from the signpost which pointed the way to the ruined fort. In the control room, Mr. Brolly was ready to set off on his journey. "Give me only what I simply must have," he said. "A toothbrush and so forth." The computer sniffed. "Oh, very well," it said, "if that's the way you feel." And it gave him a toothbrush and a spare pair of socks. Mr. Brolly looked at them. "I meant them to be in a bag," he said. The computer was silent. "Just a small bag," said Mr. Brolly. But the computer had switched itself off. Mr. Brolly was floating over the sea. The sun was shining, and all was peaceful. And then a wind began to blow. It would have blown his sombrero off had he not clutched it tightly. But in clutching his hat, he let go of his socks and his toothbrush. The travellers were making their way to the ruined fort. As they went, they passed a poster stuck to a tree. "Wanted," it said. Beneath the words was a picture of a bandit. "Oh, he looks a bit like Mr. Brolly," said Harry. "My Brolly does not look like a bandit," said Mrs. Brolly. "My Brolly is the gentlest, kindest man you could ever hope to meet." Mr. Brolly came down in the ruined fort, and he was holding one sock, which was all that remained of his luggage. "Oh, drat that computer," said Mr. Brolly. The travellers were in the little boat, making their way over the lake to the island of the ruined fort. No one seemed to notice the black storm clouds on the horizon. The little boat was tossing wildly on the lake as the storm raged all around. Harry and Mrs. Brolly clung to the sides of the boat. Wilkins had turned green, and the camera had folded up its long legs. Only the little thundercloud was happy. The little boat was drawn up on the shores of the island. The travellers, shaken but safe, stood in a group, looking around. The little cloud hovered above their heads. He had had a wonderful time. "Bubble," he said. "Bubble, bang, bang." "He says he enjoyed it very much, thank you," said Harry. "Oh, indeed," said Mrs. Brolly. And then she smiled. "At least we didn't lose our luggage," she said. "That is the worst thing that can happen to one on holiday, to lose one's luggage." They stood for a moment longer to catch their breath, and the camera took a photograph. Then, as everyone slowly made their way along the narrow, winding path, it ran ahead on its long legs. In the fort, Mr. Brolly peeped over the broken wall and watched the travellers wending their way towards him. "Oh, how utterly surprised they'll be to see me," he said. "How delighted." He struck a pose and began to practice what he would say in greeting. "See, muchachas, it is I, Brolly, the bold bandit." "That should raise a smile," he added, pleased with the idea. At that moment, the camera entered the fort. "Woo! Snicket," it said, on seeing Brolly. "Woo! Bandit's boot. Snicket. Woo! Moustache. Snicket. Woo! Back view. Snicket. Oh, stop!" cried poor Brolly, flapping his hands at the camera as though...
Very, very strange. It's got a sort of surreal masterpiece. This goes on a bit, doesn't it?
it were a large insect. "Why are you acting like this?" He grabbed the camera by its 3 legs and held it tight. And this is the scene which met the startled gaze of the travellers as they entered the fort. "The bandit!" But the little cloud bravely threw the largest bumper. "Oh, Brolly," said Mrs. Brolly, recognising her husband at last. Night had fallen, and Mrs. Brolly had made a picnic supper. Everything she needed, she found in the trunk. Mr. Brolly sat and watched all this. I wish I had brought a trunk now." "Oh, Brolly, what a wild, carefree fellow you are," sighed Mrs. Brolly, "to venture all this way with so little." And at this, the music from the trunk struck up once more. But as the Brollies danced by, Harry suddenly remembered the umbrellas, which they had left behind on the signpost.
Not the umbrellas.
"How will we go home?" he said. Then, as the dancers passed by once more, Mr. Brolly opened his umbrella, and Mrs. Brolly reached out and took Harry's hand, and so they went, floating up together, and followed by Wilkins, the little cloud, the camera, and the trunks. Harry awoke beneath his patchwork quilt. Outside,
Kind of curious to show this to AAA, see if she'll enjoy it or not. I'll see.
the day was grey, but the sunshine was making its way through the clouds. In the shaft of light, Harry could see what he thought were two large birds winging their way towards him. But as they drew near, he saw that they were not birds, but the lost umbrellas making their way home. "Quack," they said as they flew. "Quack."
Well. All right. Well, that wraps up another week here on Mellow Moments. We'll be returning next Monday, 11 a.m. on the dot, 5 days a week. That's right. We're not going to be doing weekends anymore. We're just going to be doing Monday to Friday. I think that's really in keeping with the daytime television feel of the show. All right. So long, everybody. Have a good weekend.
There are times when you deserve more than a coffee break, so make a cup of Mellow Birds. You'll find its smooth, mellow flavor turns an ordinary coffee break into a mellow moment. Mellow Birds for mellow moments.
Every day should have some.